My stepmother said, "My daughter is moving in with me. Pack your things and go find somewhere else to live." My father? He just listened and nodded, but they had no idea that the house was mine. When I showed up with the papers, they went into a complete panic. Before the story begins, if you like our channel, subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. And now, we invite you to enjoy a story with an unexpected ending. I still remember the exact moment. The smell of coffee lingered in the air. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the living room window, and I was absent-mindedly folding some clothes when I heard my stepmother's sharp voice. "My daughter is moving in with me. Pack your things and go find somewhere else to live." For a second, I thought I had misheard her. I turned to her, expecting it to be some kind of cruel joke. But it wasn't. Her expression was serious, cold, just as it had always been with me. My heart started pounding. I looked at my father, hoping for a reaction, a sign that this was completely absurd. But all he did was nod, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. "Are you kicking me out?" My voice came out weaker than I wanted. "It's not kicking you out," she said, crossing her arms. "It's just that my daughter needs a room, and you're old enough to take care of yourself." Old enough? I was 22, working part-time while studying, and that house was the only home I had ever known. "Dad, seriously? You're just going to let this happen?" He sighed, like he was already tired of the conversation before it even began. "Your stepmother is right. You should have your own life by now." Anger burned in my chest. It wasn't the first time I felt like I didn't belong in that house, but now it was official. They were discarding me like an old piece of furniture. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" I asked, trying to hold back my tears. My stepmother shrugged. "You can rent a place, stay with a friend. That's not our problem." My father said nothing. He didn't try to comfort me, didn't offer any help. He just stood there, as if my presence in that house had always been a problem that was finally being solved. That's when I realized I had never been a priority to him. Ever since my mother died, I had just been a reminder of a past he wanted to forget. I swallowed hard, feeling my heart shatter. But if they thought I was going to beg to stay, they were dead wrong. I didn't know it yet, but that moment was the beginning of something much bigger. They were sending me away, completely unaware of the huge mistake they were making. Ever since I can remember, I've always felt like something was off about the way my father treated me. When my mother was alive, our house was filled with laughter. I remember her singing while she cooked, the nights she read me stories until I fell asleep, the way she could make my father smile even on his hardest days. But when she passed away, all of that disappeared. I was only 12 when I lost her, and it was as if my father had buried me along with her. He never cried in front of me. He never hugged me. He never told me we would be okay. He just shut himself off, buried himself in work, and started treating me like a burden. At first, I tried to get close to him. I did everything I could to please him. I got good grades, helped around the house, tried to start conversations, but he never responded with warmth. His answers were always short, automatic, like he was talking to a stranger. And then, 3 years later, he met her. Patricia entered our lives like a hurricane, young, elegant, with a fake smile that could fool anyone who wasn't paying close attention. At first, I tried to like her, but it didn't take long for me to realize that to her, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. She and my father got married fast, and from day one, it was clear that I wasn't part of her new family plan. My space in the house started shrinking little by little. Small changes that together turned my life into a nightmare. First came the subtle remarks. "Your presence here must be hard for your father. You remind him of the pain, you know." Then the restrictions. "This weekend is just for the two of us. You can manage on your own, right?" And finally, the complete dismissals. "You're old enough to cook your own meals. No need to wait for dinner." Did I complain to my father? He would just sigh and say, "Don't make things harder, okay?" And that's how it went for years. I learned to stay quiet. I learned to swallow the lump in my throat every time I saw my father laughing with her, something he never did with me. I learned to take up as little space as possible in that house, because it always felt like they were one step away from throwing me out. And then it happened. Her daughter was moving in with them. And me? I was disposable. But what my stepmother and my father didn't know was that that house held a secret that would change everything. When I left that house, I didn't take much with me. A few clothes, my old laptop, and a tight knot in my chest. I didn't have a plan. I had nowhere to go. I spent a few days sleeping on a friend's couch, trying to figure out how to start over from scratch. I was still in college, working part-time at a coffee shop, and my paycheck barely covered rent on my own. Reality hit hard. I was completely alone in the world. The first few months were tough. I bounced from place to place, renting a tiny room with 3 other girls I barely knew. I split bills, took extra shifts at work, and clung to college like it was my only way out of that situation. But despite everything, I felt something new inside me. Freedom. For the first time, I didn't have to tiptoe around in my own home. I didn't have to hear my stepmother's cold remarks or endure my father's heavy silence. Then one day, everything changed. I was at work, wiping down tables after an exhausting shift, when I got an email from a lawyer. His name sounded familiar. The message read, "We need to discuss the house that belongs to you." I was confused. The house? Mine? My heart pounded. The next day, I went to the lawyer's office, having no idea what to expect. He was an older man with thin glasses and a stack of papers on his desk. As soon as he saw me, he gave me a friendly smile. "I thought you'd never come. I've tried reaching out to you a few times before." I sat down, nervous. "I'm sorry, but what is this about?" He slid an envelope across the desk toward me. "It's about your father's house, or rather..." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "The house your mother left for you." My breath caught. "What?" He continued, as if he had been expecting my reaction. "When your mother passed away, she left the house in her name and made sure in her will that when you turned 21, the property would be transferred to you." My mind was spinning. It was too much information at once. But why didn't my father ever tell me? The lawyer sighed. Maybe he just ignored it, thinking he'd never have to deal with it. But legally, this house belongs to you, and I have all the documents to prove it. A mix of shock, anger, and disbelief flooded me. For all those years, my father and stepmother treated me like a burden, threw me out like I had no right to anything. But that house was mine. I gripped the papers tightly, my chest burning with a single thought. They were going to regret every single second of what they did to me. I returned to that house in the late afternoon, the same time of day when, months earlier, my stepmother had thrown me out without a second thought. But this time, I wasn't there to beg. I was there to take back what was mine. I climbed the porch steps slowly, my heart pounding. I took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. A few seconds later, the door opened. My stepmother looked at me, first surprised, then full of disdain. "What are you doing here?" Her voice carried the same coldness as always. Behind her, my father appeared, his brow furrowed when he saw me. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face made it clear. My presence was unwelcome. I gripped the papers tightly and lifted my chin. "I came to take back what's mine." She let out a mocking laugh. "Yours? You must be delusional." Without saying a word, I held out the documents. The will. Undeniable proof that this house belonged to me. She snatched the papers from my hands, looking smug, at first. But as she read, her expression changed. The arrogance faded into disbelief, then into panic. My father took the documents from her hands and started reading. With every line, his face hardened. This can't be true," he muttered. as if refusing to believe what he was seeing. But it was. "Surprise," I said, crossing my arms. "My mother left me this house. Legally, you have no right to be here." My stepmother stared at me, furious. "You can't just show up here and throw us out of our house." "Our house?" I interrupted, feeling the anger rise inside me. "You threw me out without hesitation. You didn't think twice before discarding me. Now it's your turn to leave." Silence. Sharp, heavy. For the first time, my stepmother had nothing to say. My father ran a hand over his face, clearly desperate. "Sweetheart, can't we talk about this?" Sweetheart. Now he wanted to call me that? After years of treating me like a burden? After standing by in silence while they threw me out? I took a deep breath. I could feel my mother's presence somehow, smiling, as if she had always known this moment would come. She had made sure I would have a home. Even after her death, she had taken care of me. "There's nothing left to talk about, Dad." My voice was steady. I didn't need to yell. I had already won. "You have a deadline to leave. After that, I can let my lawyer handle things another way." My stepmother turned to my father, waiting for him to say something. But he only lowered his head. He knew there was no way out of this. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of this victory. After everything, after all the pain, justice was finally being served. My stepmother tried to fight back. "This can't be right! There must be a mistake!" she shouted, clutching the papers as if she could somehow change what was written on them. "This house belongs to your father." I shook my head, keeping my composure. "No, it doesn't. And it never did. My mother legally left everything in my name. You have a deadline to leave, and it's not me saying this. It's the law." She turned to my father for support, but he just sighed, defeated. He knew I was right. He knew he had ignored this detail for years, assuming he'd never have to deal with it. "We can work something out," he tried, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "You know we have nowhere else to go. And we're family." I swallowed hard. Family? Now he wanted to talk about family? "Family doesn't throw their own children out," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "Family doesn't discard someone like they're an inconvenience. You kicked me out without a second thought. Now it's your turn to face the consequences." My stepmother huffed, furious. "You're so ungrateful. After everything we did for you." "What exactly did you do for me?" I cut her off, feeling my heart race. "Ignore me? Treat me like I was worthless? Throw, me out of the house my mother left for me?" She fell silent. My father lowered his head. "The lawyer told me you have 30 days to leave. After that, I can file a lawsuit to have you removed. And honestly, I wouldn't mind doing it." My stepmother screamed something, but I didn't even bother listening. It didn't matter anymore. I had won. Days passed, and I didn't go back until the deadline was almost up. When I did, the house looked different. The expensive furniture my stepmother had bought was being moved out. Boxes were scattered across the floor. They were really leaving. My father was sitting on the couch, staring at the ground. When he saw me, he let out a deep sigh. "So, this is it?" "This was the ending you chose," I replied. "I wasn't the one who abandoned family. You were." He had no argument left. My stepmother shot me one last hateful glare as she walked out the door, dragging her daughter along with her. When their car disappeared down the street, I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I looked around. For the first time, this place truly felt like mine. I ran my fingers along the wall, remembering my mother's laughter, the smell of her baking on Sunday mornings. Somehow, I knew she had made sure I would find my way back home. And now, this house would be a new beginning. No pain. No rejection. The door clicked shut behind me. And with it, I left the past behind.